Hey, thanks for joining us, everyone, and welcome to today's interview of Let Go and Live Free, how to overcome emotional obstacles and live a positive, purpose-filled life. I'm your host, Lee Stein, and today we welcome Miles Rote to the broadcast. Welcome, Miles.
Thanks, Lee. I appreciate it.
Founder of Wellness Gangsters, curator of the Life Manual, yoga teacher, and self-mastery coach, Miles is passionate about how we can learn from the past, master the present, and design the future, all through the symbiosis of technology and what makes us human. That's a lot of deep concepts there. But I love it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's something. Well, first of all, thanks again for having me on. But yeah, I've spent a lot of time thinking about all of these things, and I guess for me, that's the best way. I don't know. I can kind of formulate it all.
It sounds very sexy to me, so I want to dive into it immediately.
Yeah.
We decided that what we want to talk to our viewers about today is what it means to have a story about ourselves and our ability to maybe change our story or rewrite our story. So tell us from your perspective what it means to have a story about ourselves.
Yeah, well, I mean, stories go back even further than just beyond ourselves. I think stories are sort of the information technology we use as a species to convey information. You know, for the longest time, from, just tradition or religion, the only way we could really pass on information was through story.
Yeah.
And of course, there's the story of how life came to be or how the universe came to be. There's the story of Earth. There's a story of our species coming into being. And then there's a story of our personal our storybook, and within the context of all of these other stories. So there's stories upon stories upon stories. But in order to really understand our story, we have to be able to zoom out and look at the other stories that affect the ones that we're trying to write as well. So I think part of our story and rewriting our story is really understanding the sort of other stories that are in play here. It's a very important aspect.
So as you're talking, I'm thinking about the stories that we were told as children, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, certainly, hopefully well-intentioned stories, right? But
Right.
Even the stories about what was right or what was wrong, and what was good and what was bad, and what was pretty and what was ugly. So how does that affect the story that we're telling ourselves or the story that we're living today in the present?
Yeah, I mean, and for me, so just to give you a personal story for me, so I wanted to be in the FBI and the CIA. I had a really good understanding when I was a kid of being able to kind of understand why people are thinking certain ways. And my dad went to prison for drugs. And so for me, the context of how I could utilize the ability to understand how people think, I applied that to wanting to be in the FBI and CIA and bust people for drugs and doing the bad things. So my story was, okay, I'm going to become that because my dad was in jail, and drugs are bad because he's in jail and they're illegal and it screwed up our family, right? And as I grew up and I actually followed along that trajectory, I became a police officer. I was in the Marines. I became a private investigator. And I realized, okay, this story that I've been telling myself about this, the story about how all drugs are bad, isn't actually true. Once I dug into the research and I understood these things, I realized it all broke down. And it was a very hard thing for me because I had to change my story. I had to change how I even perceived the world. So everything that I thought was, how it was basically false. And that's a hard thing to admit, but the ability to do that can so much more happiness and expansiveness as opposed to just trying to stay within the lines that we've sort of like created for ourselves and the story that we've created for ourselves. So part of rewriting our story, is burning the old stories that we've sort of written.
Yeah, I had a very religious upbringing. And my life sort of remained very status quo for a long time. Raised religiously, went to a religious school, went overseas to a religious study program, came back, went to a religious college, got married, had a religious life. And it wasn't until that sort of broke down and I was on my own co-parenting our children, that I really even have the time to ask myself, what do I really believe?
Right.
And even in that questioning, it was a journey of several years, not even just because I realized that I believed something else, but I still had one foot in that world. And you can't just because you start believing something else doesn't mean you automatically say, see you later.
Mm-hmm.
You are tied to that tradition and to your family and to that community in so many ways that it's complicated.
Yeah, and to the neural network that you've created for yourself, thinking in that context for as long as you have. So
Yes.
I had chronic pain for 20 years, and everything that sort of the way that I thought, the foundation was pain. That was like the starting point. And then from there, how I perceived the world, it started from that epicenter. And the neural networks and the sensations and my relationships and all of that was shaped by the pain. And just like you were saying, it's shaped by your religious beliefs. So you can't just burn it and then act like it's not there anymore. You're still connected to how you perceive the world through that lens in so many ways. So we have to be able to, not only understand that, but have the patience to be able to undo a lot of these things. When it comes to rewriting our story, it's often a lot less about doing and a lot more about the undoing.
Interesting. Yes, accurate.
Yeah.
Even when we rewrite our story, I think it's important to acknowledge that you don't have to completely disconnect from the old story.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still very close with my family.
Mm-hmm.
I still appreciate what that community offered me, just as community, having community. Because
Yes.
when you start rewriting your story, you can sometimes find yourself in this in-between phase of your old story and your new story. And you want to be sure not to lose yourself, sort of empowering yourself in the middle, and looking at it as a challenge maybe, or as an opportunity versus I'm completely lost and I don't know what to do.
Yeah, Charles Eisenstein, one of my favorite authors, calls that the space between the stories.
Yes, that's where I got it from.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yeah, he's brilliant. I just went to one of his conferences. I highly recommend it to anyone out there. But yes, and it's so great because it's the more stories, the better. The more experiences we have, the better. It's not that you disavow what you went through. I am so grateful that I was a police officer and a Marine and a private investigator. There's so much I learned, and there's so much I can take with me in this new way of living. It's the more well-rounded you become, the easier it is to write the story that you want because you have an understanding of, it's like you try to imagine a story from one character's point of view, you only get a tiny piece of the story. But if you can have all of the characters and see all of their perspectives and sort of zoom out, then you can really begin to really understand the story. You're not just living one dimension of it, but you kind of get to see the whole picture. One way I like to look at it is, the environment. They say that your environment produces how you think and who you are, but really who's the director of it. So if the environment is the producer, who's the director? And that's kind of where we get to come into play if we so choose, of rewriting our stories.
Absolutely. I was thinking as you were talking about it, how that is almost how we need to relate to everybody else in the world as well.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, we're looking at our story and our history and where we came from and the journeys and the challenges that we had along the way. But the way to understand others and to cultivate compassion for others and peace for the world, really, ultimately, is by trying to put yourself in their shoes for just a brief moment to understand why they might be coming at you in a certain way, why they might be angry about something that you think is hilariously funny, like traffic. I don't know.
Yeah.
And trying to, I guess, create a universality of experiences. Shared experiences, shared emotions.
Yes. And it's fun too. It's fun to be able to have a blind reaction to somebody and how they responded to you, and sort of catch yourself and be like, okay, you just reacted this way sort of blindly. What if they are going through, X, and therefore they're acting this way? And how can you change your relationship to how you're responding to this person? And instead of just blindly reacting, catching it and understanding that you just reacted, and then consciously responding and being able to choose, like when you have those moments of being able to choose how you respond to things, you become so empowered, and it becomes like a game of like, okay, that was fun. How else can I do this? You know, and it has a sort of compound interest effect when you're always doing that and catching yourself and redirecting and rewriting and editing to create a kind of final version of yourself that you want to create.
You've done a lot of traveling to different places, and I'm sure you've experienced a lot of different cultures. I'm curious to know if that feeds into your perspective, because you see people who have been raised in such a completely different way, in such a completely different community. Sometimes they're completely unplugged. How has
Yes.
that informed your knowledge and your approach to life in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think traveling in general is one of the greatest resources we have in the modern world today. I mean, if you think back a couple hundred years ago, no one could travel to other parts of the world in the way that we can today. It's a gift. The fact that we even have food from all over the world is a gift. The wars were waged over spices, and we have a spice rack now. You know, it's just fascinating. But I like to think about it in the sense of, let's say you're from somewhere like in the United States, like California, and you say California is the best place on earth, but you've never been anywhere else. And then you go to Arizona, and then you go to Oregon, and then you're like, wow, Oregon is better than California. And I'm just making this up. I don't think the one is better than the other. But you have to be able to go to these different places to say that yours is the best, you know? But if you don't have these sort of experiences in different cultures and different with different people and different ways of living, there's no way you can even think about your sort of version of it being the best, or even having the correct perspective of it. The only way to have a good perspective about where you live or about your culture, about your society, is to see others. It's not to investigate your own. So the more you can get out there and not only experience different cultures, but then be able to look back from an outside perspective back into the life that you were living. I mean, that's one of the greatest things about travel, is you're out of yourself. You change sort of the neural network in your mind, where you're just kind of responding to everything. You know, 95% of the things that you go through in your day is just a routine, and your brain is already just responding to it in the natural way that it would. When you step outside of your comfort zone and you're in a place where you don't speak the language and everything is different, you have to reorient yourself to that. And it all changes, and you can no longer just be in that sort of habitual state of just autonomy. It all changes. So then you can look back with a new sort of perspective on your life, and it looks very different. And that's why people have such transformational travel experiences, and when they go home, they're changed forever. It's because they were able to look back on their life and say, you know, I don't really like how I'm actually doing things.
Perspective, one thing that I just heard there, and resilience. Also,
Yes.
walk into a country, no idea what's going on. I was stuck in a country once. I was on a trip with somebody that spoke the language. I did not speak the language. And I was sort of I had to rely on this person to guide me. The problem was that this person and I were not getting along at all. So I was sort of stuck in this place, left to my own devices, not speaking the language, dependent upon someone that it was turning out I really couldn't be in that space with for long periods of time. And it was really a life-changing experience for me. I learned a lot from that. That was sort of a negative reinforcement kind of experience. Hopefully when we travel, we have more positive reinforcement experiences, but yes.
But yeah, it builds up so much resilience. You know, people, if their phone dies here in the United States, they may freak out because they can't find their way to their friend's house and they don't know what to do. You know, but if you go through an experience like being in a different country where you don't speak the language, you don't have any technology on you, and you have to find your way around, and that's over a course of like days and weeks that you do that. The next time you have a stressful situation, or you're back in the United States and your phone dies and you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter. Like, you build up such a resilience to things, you're able to just take a deep breath and say, I'm gonna be fine. I've been through much worse. Like, this is nothing, you know? It's a superpower when you do it enough. It really is.
I like that. Yeah. So let's talk about rewriting our story. somebody is unhappy, they're going through maybe depression or anxiety or some sort of emotional obstacle, and they want to deliberately recreate. What would you advise in terms of first steps? Let's make this easy, sort of 101, rewriting your story. Let's say they don't have the ability to travel and gain immediate perspective and change, but they need to shift out of their comfort zone and they need to start a new trajectory.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it all follows a very similar formula, no matter what you're going through when it comes to rewriting your story. I think the first thing you have to do, which anyone can do, information is free these days. Books are very affordable, so I mean, it's there. But the first thing we have to do is learn sort of the history of our species, and that doesn't mean that you have to know everything about it. But we have to understand why, like how we tick. We have to be able to look under the hood a little bit. So if we're anxious, we need to understand where the anxiety sort of comes from. You know, it's a simple thing is why we love sugar so much. We love sugar so much because, of course, it was very rare that we would come upon sugar back when we were hunters and gatherers. And therefore, whenever we would get it, we would try to eat as much as we possibly could. So it's normal, if you have that understanding and you have this craving towards sugar, you can step back and say, okay, that's a natural biological process that I'm going through. I can choose to either override it and not have it, or I can choose to sort of give into it and have it. But understanding our sort of natural instinctual cravings is very important, even when it comes to sexuality and romantic partners, you know, and understanding that it's normal to be attracted to other people. That doesn't mean that you don't love your significant other. But that's part of our species. We've been polyamorous forever, and now we're trying to live within a monogamous society, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that if we choose that, but we have to be able to understand from a biological perspective our cravings and our predispositions. So the first is just starting to understand what makes you tick. So then as you try to rewrite your story, you're able to do it under the context of sort of like control, like you have control over it. It's not your biology controlling you, and there's a difference.
Right.
So that's the number one step, in my opinion. The next is sort of understanding how your religion or cultures or traditions have affected you and how they've sort of nurtured your belief systems. So your larger kind of belief systems that you've built up over time, how have they influenced them? And you don't have to disregard it or think that it's the best, but it's just, again, it's understanding that they have influenced how you think and how you interface with life. So just understanding them, even if it's writing it down and saying, okay, I'm influenced by this, my culture affects me this way. And then the next thing is understanding propaganda and the media and our culture, like our modern society and how it influences us. So there's a really good book. It's called Propaganda by Barclays. He is the nephew of Sigmund Freud, actually. And this is back in, I don't know the date, so I'm not going to guess. But he actually discovered that people could control the masses through certain sort of techniques. And so this is when corporations started to utilize all of these techniques, and they actually prey on our biological predispositions to sell things or, you know, whatever. So we are actually manipulated and controlled, not controlled, but they try to control us for profit. And there's not necessarily anything quote unquote wrong with that. It's not evil. It's a technique. It's marketing, right? It's psychology of marketing, but it's taken further where propaganda is used on a daily basis to influence your behavior, period. And that's not a conspiracy theory or anything like that. So it's understanding how you're controlled and how you're manipulated in today's world. So if you are watching commercials and you feel the urge, like there are so many things in the media that try to make us feel fear or like we need something, you know, they are preying upon that. So it's understanding how you're influenced by that. So your species, your culture, the media, the corporations, and how they influence you, right? So if you're able to see all of the influences now and sort of set those aside and then actually write out the things that you want in your life, how many people actually spend the time to do that? We'll have set like dietary goals, we'll set like physical fitness goals, but are you setting like your life goals? Are you setting like your purpose, like what you want to do and how you want to show up in the world and the one time that you live, like, are you writing that down? Most people aren't. It's like 98% of the people in the world don't do that. And then they wonder why those things sort of aren't unfolding in their lives. Well, you're not taking the time to really be honest with what you want. And when we're able to put it all of it down and the things that we want, we can get real honest with ourselves about the decisions that we're making on a daily basis. Do they align with these things that I really want, right? So once you know what you really want, once you understand the influences, now you're able to go through your daily life and say, okay, does this align with the thing that I truly want? And is this craving that I have, is it coming from the better version of myself and the person that I want to be? Or is it from one of these external influences? Is it a biological predisposition? Is it a cultural influence? Is it because the media is making me feel a certain way? So you practice mindfulness now and try to understand and ascertain sort of when every little micro decision that you make throughout your day, where is this coming from? Is this me? Is this aligning with what I want? And then you're able to choose. So this is mindfulness, of course, it has taken off recently and is almost becomes like too much of a buzzword to be taken serious sometimes, but it's a weapon when used appropriately. And if you're able to exercise it to, again, be able to dictate what is yours and what it is that you truly want and what you're being influenced by, you're able to sort of navigate your life. So practicing mindfulness, and then you can design your environment now. That's kind of the next step. You can set up your environment such that it influences you to be the person that you want to become. There's a term called ontological design, where you design your environment and it designs you back. And we know that our environment is producing us. So how can we set up our environment to produce the version of ourselves that we want? So I think using that sort of like formula, we can really rewrite our story, because it's coming from a place of what we truly want. It's not being influenced by outside sources or our biology. And then we use, the weapon of mindfulness to sort of zero in on what we really want and write the story of who we want to become.
Absolutely. That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that storyline, I guess.
Yeah.
It reminded me of a workshop that I did which very much reflected what you're saying, sort of creating a values-based life for ourselves and making sure that we're aligned with those values that are important to us. And so we were asked to write, not even a manifesto, but a very short statement of who we are, or at least who we want to be. I'm a compassionate, caring woman. I am a fierce, loyal leader. Whatever you wanted to write. And evaluate in 7 different areas of your life: family, relationships, work, health, etc., where you were on the scale relative to those values.
Yes.
And the results were kind of shocking.
Yes.
100 people in the room.
But what a great tool then to have, and to be shocked. Like there is no better thing than to be shocked, to be wrong. I mean, we should seek to be wrong. We shouldn't seek to be right, because the more you can be wrong, the more you will be right, because then you're able to point out your deficits instead of pointing to your wins. And if you can always work on your deficits, the more you're going to be able to win. So yeah, being able to put those things out there and say, holy, I am very deficit, or, I have deficits in all of these different areas.
Yeah.
I need to go to work. And that's a great feeling, because now you're not just wasting your time or feeling this like constant state of anxiety because you don't know what to do. And it's usually that indecisiveness that puts the people in the worst spot, So if you're honest with yourself and you're able to, write that out and see the things you need to work on, you're on the way.
Just the act of writing it down causes changes in your brain.
100%.
In a good way.
Yes.
And it starts that evolution or that cultivation of purpose.
Yes.
Sort of a baseline for it. And I used to be a writer, but in a very fictional, write letters kind of way. And I sort of lost, I lost that skill somewhere along the way. I got involved in corporate life and it had nothing to do with my writing. And getting back into it, just journaling after meditation, doing this workshop and writing down what was important to me and where I was deficit or where I was on the plus side. The next day was one of the best days of my life. I had nothing going on, but I woke up in the most incredible, peaceful, Zen place with a real sharp vision of who I wanted to be and where I wanted to get to. And I was sort of shocked.
Yeah. No, it's a great feeling. It really is.
Yeah. Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us and sharing these tools. I hope all of you will avail yourselves of these ideas and cultivate that mindfulness, which is really also another way of saying self-awareness, right? Maybe that was the buzzword back then. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's all for the best, indeed. And if you find that you are deficit in any of those areas, that's okay. Don't beat yourself up about it. We all get there. The other thing I want to say is that your purpose can change. You don't have to write something down and say, I want to be the CEO or I want to be A, B, or C. And then 3 years later, you're looking at that saying, crap. Because your values do change and your direction can change and who you want to be can change. You can be 50 different things in one lifetime, and there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make you flighty.
No, I would say that it should change because you're going to encounter new information in your life. And based on that new information, it should change because what you know now is not something you're going to know in 10 years. And if you're having good life experiences in the next 10 years, you're going to learn so much. So then you're going to maybe have a better idea of what you should be doing. All the things that I keep thinking that I should be doing, and that's the ultimate, turns out once I learn enough or I do enough, that's not the case. And it takes me somewhere else. Right. So invite the change, you know, that it's a great thing. It just shows that you're expanding into new things and not staying stuck in just one dimension.
It's the journey, right? Not the destination.
Of course.
To get cliche. Well, thank you again, Miles. I appreciate you taking the time to share your wisdom with us. And I hope we can have you back on a future summit.
Absolutely. Thanks, Leah. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Everybody, we will see you on tomorrow's broadcast of Let Go and Live Free. And until then, bye for now.